So thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to talk today about anatomy in Nazi Germany and its legacies for medicine today. And I'd like to address this topic under the title Books, Bones, and Bodies. This is some very hard history that I talk here about, so beware of the fact that some of the details might be really hard to look at. I try to warn before I bring up any images that might be hard to see. I will start actually with Erich Maria Remarque, and actually he's become more well-known just lately because of the Oscars, because the second movie version of his pacifist novel from 1928, All Quiet on the Western Front, got once again a whole set of Oscars. And in even the first movie version, 1930, All Quiet on the Western Front, also got Oscars at the time. At the same time, when that movie was screened in Germany before 1933 already, there were quite a few battles where the Nazis battled in the movie theaters against the showing of that particular movie. In 1933, then, Erich Maria Remarque, as a pacifist, had to leave Germany. And after the Second World War, he was actually interviewed by a US-American reporter, and Erich Maria Remarque said at the time, "The difficulty is, you see, that our imagination cannot count. And if I say one died, a man I have made you know and understand, then perhaps I have told you something that you should know about the Nazis." Now, for Erich Maria Remarque, it was not a man actually who made him know about what the Nazis did, even though Remarque was outside Germany at the time. It actually was this woman. This woman is Elfriede Scholz. She was born on March 25th in 1903. She was a seamstress, and during the Second World War, in conversations with her neighbors, she very much doubted Hitler's prowess to actually find a victory for Germany in this war, and he declared that she would shoot him if she had a chance. Scholz was betrayed by her neighbors to the authorities. They denounced her. She was put on trial for aiding and abetting the enemy by doubting Hitler, and she was sentenced to death. She was executed in Berlin Plötzensee prison on December 16, 1943. And directly after her execution by decapitation, her body was brought immediately down the street to the Anatomical Institute, where the anatomist Hermann Stiewe was waiting for her body to remove her reproductive organs for his research. What is remarkable about Elfriede Scholz is that her maiden name was Remarque, and she was the sister of Erich Maria Remarque. And this is why he knew about the Nazis and what they did to the bodies of victims of the regime. Now, if we want to understand what actually happened to Elfriede Scholz and the activities of anatomists, we have to look at the various facets of anatomy in Nazi Germany between 1933 and 1945. The image you see here is a charcoal drawing by Leopold Metzenbauer, who worked in Vienna in 1943 and documented here the arrival of caskets with the bodies of executed persons in the Vienna anatomy department. Anatomists had a very strict and strong relationship with politics, and of the 235 anatomists we have currently data for 180. 1/3 of them were actually dismissed because they were Jews or political dissidents, and they had either to leave the country or run the risk of being imprisoned and even killed. The majority of those who remained joined the Nazi Party, in fact, more than 80%, and they collaborated on racist theories that supported the regime and in the anatomical body procurement that for them became better than ever before. because it included increasing numbers of victims of the Nazi regime, and these included executed resistance fighters, women like Elfriede Scholz, victims who were killed in the euthanasia murder program, forced laborers, and many others. These bodies then were used in anatomical education and science, and here we see that bodies of executed victims were preferred for their quote-unquote freshness and the health of these bodies in research. Publications with studies based on these victims' bodies were increasingly published during the Second World War, and even after the war, anatomists used their wartime collections. And then we see that these teaching and research collections were actually created with the bodies of Nazi victims. Altogether, we see here very clear stages of an ethical transgression, where we have a paradigm change from working with the dead to working with what I call the future dead, that is human experimentation and even murder for anatomical purposes. Now, I believe there are many legacies from this history, tangible and intangible ones. Again, I like to address them under the title Books, Bones and Bodies. Few German and Austrian anatomists lost their positions after the war. The old teachers were the new teachers, the old researchers, the new researchers. Their studies on bodies of Nazi victims were published in journals and books that were read around the world, and this knowledge is now integrated into the general canon of anatomy knowledge. Bodies of Nazi victims were used in German and Austrian anatomies for many years after the war as part of institutional so-called material, and for decades there was silence surrounding these legacies. One of these books is the Pernkopf Atlas, a topographical anatomy of man, published between 1937 and 1960, and the first American edition came out in 1963. Its author was Eduard Pernkopf. He was the chair of anatomy at Vienna Anatomy from 1933 on, and he was also a very convinced Nazi ideologue. What we can see in this atlas is that during the war years, the illustrators left signs of their Nazi sympathies with the swastika and the SS runes from the SS badge. And what we do know is that bodies of victims were used for some of these images, but it remains unclear which images or which victims are actually shown here. And the atlas is still used today. Then we also have actually bones that are still being found. Here's an example from Berlin in 2014, where during excavation work, bones were found at a property of the Free University of Berlin. This is the bone pit that was found at the time, and this is located in the garden of this building here. The building was taken over by the Free University of Berlin, which was founded after the separation of Berlin in 1945. This building is the former Kaiser Wilhelm Institute for Anthropology, Human Heredity, and Eugenics in Berlin-Dahlem in Inestraße 22. What's important about this building and its history is that one of its directors from 1942 on was the Ottmar Freiherr von Verscher, an internationally respected twin researcher who also happened to be the mentor of Josef Mengele, the physician who had done horrific experiments on prisoners in Auschwitz, including on children. And he sent specimens from Auschwitz to von Verscher. And this history was overlooked in the handling of this particular set of human remains, and the bone fragments were handled routinely and incinerated. This was in the mid-2010s, one of many such discoveries, so that we actually then decided as a group of medical historians internationally to meet in Yad Vashem in 2017 for a symposium there, to decide there on recommendations arising, recommendations on how to deal with Holocaust-era human remains. And particularly, we wanted this to happen at Yad Vashem with a group of Jewish experts, because we needed the voice of the Jewish community in this particular set of recommendations. The Vienna Protocol was formulated there by Rabbi Joseph Pollack, who himself is a Holocaust survivor. The history of anatomy in Nazi Germany also shines a very clear light on ongoing problems in anatomy, as unethical handling of anatomical bodies still exists in many places. Did you know, in 2021, bones of Black children killed in a police bombing were used in an Ivy League anthropology course that had connections with Princeton? Did you know that in the same year, 2021, a body donated to science was dissected for a paying audience without the knowledge of the relatives, without any consent by that particular donor or his family? And this body had actually been brokered through a for-profit company that essentially prey on the indigent and do not adhere to strict ethical concerns. Likewise, did you know that anatomy imaging software applications all use this particular set of data? This goes back to the 1990s. This is from the Visible Human Project from the National Library of Medicine. And this particular set of data is from a murderer who was executed in Texas in 1993. Presumably he had donated his body on death row, but if you have ethical concerns about capital punishment or free will on death row and the use of vulnerable populations in human experimentation, then you will have some ethical questions about this. At a minimum, what we need here is transparency. As always in anatomy, so also in its history, pattern recognition is essential, not only to grasp anatomical knowledge, but also to understand how historical ethical transgressions in Nazi Germany are reflected in anatomy education and research today in other places and times. Ask wherever you go and wherever you work in medicine, where do the books, the bones, the bodies, the tissues, the images, and our knowledge come from? They all have a history. Thank you very much.